What is up, Preacher Creatures? I'm so excited to have you here for another episode of the Preacher Creature podcast.
I'm Ashley Lewis, one of your co-hosts. I'm here in Durham, North Carolina. Again, I'm a graduate of Columbia Seminary, and I'm involved in work in the nonprofit and church-based spaces to do with ecological justice ministry.
And I'm Jake Myers. I teach homiletics at Columbia Theological Seminary, and I also offer preaching coaching through my website, thepreachingdoctor.com. So feel free to hit me up if you want some extra help in your preaching.
We so appreciate you continuing to tune in to this podcast. Again, we're here to help provide insights and community for weary preachers. We want to cover books that are relevant to preachers, that are written by homileticians and practitioners whose work really can help energize us in compelling preaching.
Yeah, and if you like this episode, you'll definitely want to go to the website at Columbia Seminary, look at the Preacher Studio for renewal, because we are offering every January restorative mindfulness and yoga retreats. And this will make more sense when we get to talking about this book that we're so excited about.
So our guest today is Kevin Miguel Garcia. And Jake and I'm sure those who are viewing this and probably can even hear it in our voices, that this interview is particularly special because Kevin is a friend of ours, not only a fellow practical theologian, an incredible preacher, but also a friend that we know from Columbia Seminary. So this interview is incredibly special. The book that we're going to talk about is called "What Makes You Bloom," and it's all about spiritual practices and how to really develop and cultivate a living spiritual practice. So it's going to be so exciting to have Kevin in the room to talk with us.
Yeah, it's so funny, Ashley, because you and I met at the same time that I met Kevin, and one of the things I loved about them in the preaching and public proclamation class, which is kind of the introductory preaching class we offer at Columbia Seminary, was they brought so much energy and joy and sass into their preaching. Yeah. It was just so much fun because, there are some people you never really know what's going to come out of their mouths.
Right.
But it's always with Kevin, they have this capacity to always say something that's really profound and really engaging at the same time. And they balance like really deep spiritual insights with this irreverence that I find wonderful.
Absolutely.
Needs more of. So it was great to have them.
Yeah, so much humor. And just a way of talking about joy and delight that is infectious and really makes you want to go figure out, like, what is it that Kevin's doing? Because I want to be doing that too.
Yeah.
I felt that way even from the first time that we met in seminary, which was like in orientation. I sort of linked up with Kevin and another friend of ours, Miles Markham, pretty quickly. And I learned later, we all hit it off and ended up sitting together in Old Testament class regularly and kind of just checking in with each other. And Kevin and Miles had already been friends. And so I just felt like I was really having a great time kind of tagging along. But I learned later, they told me that they kind of gravitated toward me on those first days of our seminary program because I looked like somebody who knew what was going on.
You were the Hermione Granger of the
exactly. Group. I was absolutely the Hermione Granger of this group.
Yeah.
And but that was like, yeah, that feels right for me. Okay, I'm okay with it because y'all are teaching me things that I am excited about. We're laughing, we're having a great time, and I felt just kinship and kindred spirits with them right away. So I've been fortunate, even though we're not seeing each other as frequently, and the pandemic really like derailed some of the in-person ways that we were in community. To just have that foundation in our friendship has been such a gift. And now to watch and see what's coming from Kevin as ministry continues. And again, it's like very, you could call it ministry, you could call it a lot of other things because it isn't exclusively Christian, which is something that we can all, I think, learn a lot about.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, you talked about the pandemic. I remember you and Kevin were in a class that I was teaching called Contemporary Homiletical Theories and Theologies, which is a very abstract kind of nerd focused class. And then the world fell apart halfway through and all of a sudden we had to learn how to record ourselves on video for final sermons, and I had to record lectures.
Right.
So we were all scrambling, and having people like you and Kevin in the class just made it a lot more joyful than I think it had been for some of my colleagues who were like, really like so serious about everything. Like,
Yeah.
it was a great class. I had fun.
Yeah. Our cohort was so special.
Mm-hmm.
And Columbia is a special place, as we all know. We love it. Say it all the time. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's really exciting that this book is giving us, I think it offers preachers a lot of things. And maybe at first this isn't a book that our regular audience would gravitate toward, but I
Mm-hmm.
think there are some really compelling reasons why we should think about picking it up and reading it. And one of them is something that we'll talk about with Kevin, which is how so many pastors and preachers and professors are sort of we run dry, that
Yeah.
our wells are not even full so that we can dish out spiritual water for other people. And so getting to some basics of how to create these living spiritual practices is something that this book is really great at doing.
Yeah.
And then I think another area where I see a lot of promise for how this book can inform preachers is that snapshot view of major parts of today's spiritual landscape, right? Preachers may see themselves in this book, but if they cannot, I am sure that they will be able to recognize their audience, their congregants, their
Mm-hmm.
community reflected in it. That includes people who may currently be in the pews and they may be questioning if church is the right place
Yeah.
for them because they may not be getting the spiritual aliveness that they seek. But it also includes people who are not even in our churches because they've been hurt in some of the
Mm-hmm.
ways that Kevin talks about,
Yeah.
even if they are more progressive spaces. So Kevin's experiences, while being all their own, are definitely emblematic of what so many millennials, but also plenty of overlap with the other generations, what so many of us have experienced. And so Kevin's stories are examples that of like how folks have experienced trauma in religious
Mm-hmm.
spaces, how we carry this long held grief and pain, and how we really unapologetically desire healing and freedom to explore spiritual wisdom that may
Yes.
come from other traditions across human time and space. And so, preachers who can kind of navigate these congregational pathways that Kevin sets up for us will serve churchgoers and church seekers and church avoiders more faithfully by what's offered in this book, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's said so well, Ashley. And the content itself is stellar.
Yeah.
Kevin has this ability to weave in wisdom from so many sources, including but not limited to the Bible. So it's like one page, it's a reference from a global religious tradition. Another page, it's movies and novels and social media and pop culture. And then, as you said, woven throughout are these autobiographical and personal relational illustrations
Yeah.
that really uh, show this theory and practice. Like it
Yeah.
names it in a really crystal clear way that I think this is the kind of book that you could have a book discussion in your
Yep.
church because it's written for a very popular audience. It's not just written for preachers.
That's right.
Some of the other folks that we interview, you really have to have a Master of Divinity degree in order to even begin to understand some of
Sure.
the concepts. Not this book. This book is written for a wide audience, and I think that if you shared this with folks in your church, I think it would really open some
Yeah.
conversations,
Yeah.
and especially for those of you preachers who are in churches where you're challenging the status quo a little bit, but
That's
you're just
right.
kind of chipping away at it, almost like in the Shawshank Redemption, where he's like
Yes.
one handful of sand at a time.
Right.
This could really move you forward
Yeah.
and can open some conversations that I think will be great. There's also meditations and mantras that Kevin offers that you can go to their website at thekevingarcia.com. And if you sign up for the email list, they have meditations for every chapter of the book. And I personally have gone through all of them and
Mm,
found so much joy
yeah.
and wisdom that they offer. One that was kind of interesting. I tend to work harder than I ought to. I don't slow down as much as I need to. And they had one of the titles of their meditation was "Lay Your Ass Down,"
Yes.
and I took a nap for the first time in years,
Wow.
and it was like glorious. In fact, I missed a meeting
Oh my
because
gosh.
I'm like, oh, I won't fall asleep. I'll just lay here and be
Right.
counting the time until it's over. But I fell asleep, and it was the
Good for you,
best
Jake.
the best rest. And y'all, I'm sorry if this sounds like an infomercial, but the book is just so damn practical, and
It's so
Kevin makes it
good.
so much fun. You're gonna want to check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, without more of us going on and on about it, let's go ahead and bring Kevin in and get this conversation started.
Let's do it. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to talk about your book.
It's a pleasure to be with y'all. It's lovely to see you again because it's been a few years. Because like, yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I graduated and then Ashley graduated, and then like now we're all in parts unknown. I'm glad to be around you again.
I
Yeah.
know. And having me not even being in Atlanta anymore, I don't even have that like might run into you around town thing going on.
I
So
weep.
it's so good to just be even in the digital space together and to see your beautiful face. So welcome.
Thank you.
We're gonna jump right in talking about the structure of the book. The chapters for our listeners who have not read the book yet, the chapters for this book are structured according to the fruits of the spirit, which at first I have to say shocked me a bit
Me
I
too.
because
know because like
yes, it feels so churchy a little bit, but like this is not your mama's churchy fruits of the spirit.
no.
You reframe them and really like set them free from the oppression and tyranny of white Jesus and sky daddy God, as you say.
Yeah.
So we learn this whole new way to understand the fruits of the spirit that it still feels to me like it has such biblical roots, but it's much more relevant to how
Mm.
we actually can become the beloved self that God created us
Yes.
each to
Yes.
be. So I'm thinking, for example, the first one, I'll set it up and then you can tell us more about it.
Sure.
The fruit of self-control. Rather than a kind of the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak type of self-control where humans are shamed into deprivation, punished over their natural yearnings, things like that. Actually, self-control, what if it's about that true self with a capital S, the
Hmm.
part of you that is soul, God, the creative force, and I'm quoting you a little bit here,
Hmm.
who you are before the stories you tell about yourself. That self, what if that self was in control? And then you show us how this triad of practice, rhythm, and self control yields the fruit. And so I just love this
Hmm.
rebrand so much. And I'm curious if you could tell us how this idea came to you and like how did you first realize that the fruits of the spirit could work in this kind of liberative framework?
I think initially this idea came to me at the tail end of seminary. So this is like 2020, right around when like my first book came out, Bad Theology Kills. And funny enough, you're meditating on the Bible and whatnot sometimes because you're, writing papers. But like I always thought that the fruit of the spirit was a really wonderful litmus test to tell whether or not your life was in accordance with the things that you say that you believe. Like the fruit of your spirit or the fruit of your life is not going to lie about the process of your life. It's going to tell you
Mm,
exactly what's going on because fruit is a latent data point. It's the result of things happening over time. um
yeah.
and self-control, as I was listening, I was thinking love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And like love, joy, and peace are so like ephemeral, and like people, they mean 20 different things to 20 different people. And
Mm,
I was just thinking as it was before I started seminary, and as I was in seminary, I was really digging into my yoga practice. And yoga, what I learned through that practice was that, like, when your body is still, like you're in downward dog, are you thinking, oh my God, I hate
Mm-hmm.
this, I'm dying, my body's gonna give out? Or are you thinking, breathe, just breathe?
Mm-hmm.
Do you need to rest? Lay down and pick it back up when you can, but just breathe. And the ability for me, like through yoga and then, through meditation, allowed me to watch my thoughts. And it was just a choice every single day to come back to the mat, even if it was just for 5 minutes, even if it was for 15 minutes. Um, watching a video or just leading myself, doing something to make my body feel good and help my mind focus on something other than the fact that the world seemed to be falling apart around me. Um, And so from that, when I was thinking about the fruit of the spirit, it was like, oh, the list is backwards. There was just like a prompting, prompting of the spirit, if you will. But like there was just an inkling in me. I'm just like, what if turn it around, self-control, and then what comes after that kind of just like goes headlong into
Yeah.
everything else. Because if you start with self-control, like which is just the only thing you actually have control over.
Right.
And even in that, it's like it's not even like so much about like trying to control, but just like, you know, I think about just like what do I naturally want to do? What are those natural tendencies and cravings? And then a lot of those cravings and thoughts and feelings are completely unexamined. So I don't even know if they belong to me. I don't know if I even want that. I've
Right.
just been told I want that. I don't know if I actually
Yes.
need that. My body's just triggered and is like searching for comfort. And so I'm rather than actually responding to the world the way that I want to, I am reacting out of a sense of whatever it is, fear, loss,
Yeah.
separation from God. And so self-control for me um, was like at the root of like what comes next, which I think is practice. And I like
Mm.
everybody who's ever known me knows that I harp on it because like literally through practice we realize how much easier it is, how much easier it is to be
Mm.
kind to the self, how much easier it is to not go back to the same things over and over and over again because you've practiced what love feels like on
Right.
whether it's like on your mat in the morning or whether you are a journaler. um I'm not saying there's not a singular path for this. But it
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
begins, I think, with a regular time each day of reconnecting with God, with self, with source, which for me is very synonymous. Because I really do think that who we are at our very core, contrary to what some theologies might state, I think that from the jump we are very good, and
Mm.
we don't need to armor ourselves with virtues. We don't need to armor ourselves
Yeah.
or protect ourselves or like try to hide ourselves with good things. It's just like if you can recognize from the jump who you very is, it's good. Like, and you're not a piece of shit. Like you've got cravings, but
Mm.
that's not a bad
Right.
thing. It makes you human. You're not going for perfection. You're going
Yeah.
for, you know, possibility.
Yeah.
So it
And
starts,
Good.
rootedness,
and yes,
you
it
know?
starts with, I think, finding the thing that I'm willing to do a little bit every day. Um, which is like the second part of which is the next chapter. So
Yep.
let me not jump ahead in case your questions are gonna roll
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, Kevin, I've been in the church my whole life, and I've been serving in the church professionally since I was 18. And I actually have the fruit of the spirit tattooed in runes on my arm. And
Yes.
so when you ask the readers, finish this sentence, for the fruit of the spirit is, and I was like, oh, I got this one.
Mhm.
And then you say, if you can
Yeah.
finish that sentence, you've got religious trauma.
Cheers.
If you can't go read your Bible, you heathen. Kidding.
Mhm.
I
um,
love that part so much.
yeah, so funny. So one of the first insights you offer about the fruit of the spirit is that fruit doesn't just happen, but it
Mhm.
emerges through the cultivation of everything that is not fruit in partnership with the environment and other creatures. And
Mhm.
that if you want to enjoy the fruits, you have to cultivate them first and to give them and under conditions to which they can grow. And we can do this through different practices like yoga, different rhythms of life as we're pursuing wisdom. And I never, ever had this thought before. And I so love the practices that you mentioned that help us to get behind the fruit and to think how we might produce it.
Mm-hmm.
It is, in my opinion, the most accessible and poignant and fun marrying of traditional Christianity with what might be called indigenous practices from global traditions. And these are voices and practices that might be avoided in some Christian circles, even progressive ones.
Yeah.
And they might even be considered a little taboo. Nevertheless, as you say, if certain practices help produce virtues that Christianity says we ought to possess, then how could they be bad?
Ding, ding, ding.
And just because it's a different way of tilling the soil or scattering the seed or a source of water that is outside the Christian norm, if the fruit that is produced is juicy and sweet and life-sustaining, then the process should be welcomed. And when I ask myself what Christianity really is about, it's about the means by which we become a certain kind of person. Or we could think about it as is it about becoming that certain kind of person. So maybe the methods that worked for Jesus or Paul don't work for us today.
Yeah.
But if we achieve the same end, then don't we still arrive where God wants us to be? So I love that. And here's my question. For folks who want to open up to wisdom outside of Christianity, but might hear in their heads all of the reasons why they shouldn't, what encouragement or words of challenge might you offer?
Oh, I love this one. Well, not to reference the Bible again, but one of my favorite
Bring it.
one of my favorite stories is Jesus going into the desert to be tempted by Satan. And then I remember that, one of the renderings of, is Asatan, which means the accuser. And I'm like, oh, the accuser came to Jesus in the desert. And I'm just like, and just basically said, if you really were who you said you were, you would do X, Y, and Z things. Who among us don't have that? Who among us hasn't got like that, a little accuser in the back of our head saying, just like, if you really are a good Christian, you're not going to pick up the Bhagavad Gita. You're not going to look to Emily Dickinson or Robert Frost. You're not going to look to young Pueblo. You're not going to look to Cole Arthur Riley for these things. You've got the Bible, at least because I grew up very Southern evangelical, so it's the Word of God TM, and everything outside of that, unless it's one of those weird devotionals that they produce that are just so poorly written. Like Zondervan, what are you doing? I'll call him out.
But the graphics are stellar.
Oh my God,
Exactly.
Christian Teen Adventure Bible.
The design and the marketing.
Oh my God, that one got me.
Top notch.
But like when I started, like, I mean, we've all had that moment when we meet somebody or run into something outside of the Christian universe that we're like, oh, that's God. That's spirit speaking to me right in here in my chest.
Yeah.
And the question for me becomes, I'm just like, how do I just hold on to that? Like if God is from where I'm sitting, bigger than all religion in general, like the Christian tradition is one beautiful, I mean, it's beautiful, depending on your perspective. It's a picture. Well, I'll let you put your own thoughts on what kind of picture it is.
Sure.
But I think like if you can recognize God in yourself, if you can recognize love in yourself and wisdom in yourself, it's just like like the Holy Ghost is no respecter of persons, and I pretty much think they speak through whoever they want to, if one has the ability to and the openness to perceive it. So like when I first got out of started exploring non-biblical text, I picked up A Course in Miracles, which was penned in 1975. And some people said it was hokey and silly and stupid because miracles. But it is the singular text that has changed my mind and my life, because it helped me stop I'm no longer afraid of God. I do not. I know.
Wow.
I understand that I am God's child. I understand that I have a purpose on this planet. I understand that God's will for this world is that we would be happy and that we would experience salvation in real time through our bodies. And I didn't get that from I didn't get that from another source. I didn't find that in another teacher. I found it in a book penned in 1975 by somebody who heard a voice that said, "This is A Course in Miracles. Take notes." And I find it to be some of the most, I think it takes the teachings of Jesus to the nth degree, And how I know that is the fruit it produces in my life. Like, I feel more
Mm,
committed to my work as a spiritual practitioner. I feel more devoted to Jesus Christ, like the actual person who died and rose. And yeah, even though I'm like barely a Christian these days, I'll still say I could dig the resurrection. It could have happened.
yeah.
Either way, I still think Jesus is with me. So like, go off. Um, but
Yeah.
it's a matter of like being able to trust wisdom because you know it. There's a part of you
Hmm.
deep internally that, a lot of Christians believe that we got the Holy Ghost guiding us, but said another way, it's just that your inner self can recognize truth. And if you're unsure about it, you test it. Test it out, see if it works for
Yes.
you. Because, what's
Yeah.
what's something written in the Quran might not make sense to you because it's got a whole culture attached to it. Something in the Bhagavad Gita
Right.
might not make sense to you because it has a whole culture attached to it. But you pick up the poetry of Rumi, and suddenly
Hmm.
a whole world just
It
opens up to
clicks.
you.
Yeah.
Like, what does he say? Like, he says in one of his opening lines, it said, Muhammad says, I come to you before dawn to chain you and drag you away. It is
Mm.
strange that we should be drug out into sweet paradise, but this is the way. There are two people who come to the
Wow.
path, those who come willingly and those who are dragged home.
Hmm.
Oh,
Wow.
come on, somebody.
It's confronting.
Yeah.
And
And it's really occurred to me. Oh, go ahead.
no, you got it.
It's just occurred to me as I've started to explore tools that have helped me really foster my own introspection and seek
Mhm.
wisdom that may not come from those traditional sources, especially when it comes to traditions that have done such a better job of rooting humans in the ecological in our actual ecology, and
Mhm.
that have been more connected to God's creation than Christianity has in its the form that we know it in the Western world. And so as I've explored those, what's become clear to me is that the inner knowing, that self knowledge and that wisdom that you can cultivate within yourself in partnership with God is what certain fundamentalist brands of Christianity find threatening. That is
Yes.
the threat,
And they
is that
fight
we
against
would
it
believe.
actively.
Yeah, and as much as you can go to God through Jesus, that Jesus opened up this connection for us through God in that worldview, that's great. But if you can really only seek wisdom in these designated places and this designated style of teaching, and anything that turns that wisdom, what do I know to be true? What do I feel? What have I learned from my experience? Um, that that is where a lot of the threat lies,
Mm.
um,
Because
which it
knowledge
makes me
is
want to lean.
power.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, yeah.
It gets really. I know a lot of my work is with folks who are like trying to come into that their own sense of like self-knowing and having a taste of their own power, and I would say even like possibly their purpose beyond being a
Yeah,
cog in the capitalist Christian machine of,
definitely.
shout out to you mega churches. Yeah, I'm talking to you. I'll call you out here. Um, but a lot of times people are so afraid of trusting, frankly, trusting God, if you will. Like
Hmm.
some people say, I have trust issues with everybody. I'm just like, I really actually think it's not a trust issue with anybody else except for yourself. It's just like, I'm afraid. I don't
Mhm.
trust myself to know what's true. I don't trust myself to know what's helpful for
Right.
myself because I've just been told my entire life. So I don't know what's me, what's my programming, what's culture at
Right.
large, what's survival. And so through our
Sure.
our personal spiritual work, which I think is extremely wrapped up with all of other liberation movement, if not the baseline for all of it.
Yes.
Um, the work is really, I think, like learning what peace feels like in the body and trying,
Hmm.
like, I think, like, I harp on that one too, is like that for me is like a baseline necessity for me to even begin talking about anything else, because not just peace within the spirit, but like learning how to bring my body into equilibrium, back out of the fight or
Mm-hmm.
flight state, out of the triggered moments, into a space where I am calm, into a space where I
Yeah.
can listen to the still small voice, if you will. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times, just like we don't know how to trust that still small voice, because when we get quiet, all the other voices come up. And we think,
That's
oh, I
right.
can't quiet my mind. I don't know how to meditate. I don't know how to do this. It's just like the problem is not the voices coming up in your head. The problem is you're not listening to them. They're giving you data.
Mm-hmm.
Let them tell you
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. Evaluate them. See if they're helpful. Because a lot of times the thoughts aren't even helpful. And you can be like,
Right.
Yeah.
oh, it can be a lot. It can be a lot.
It can. But your book is just so helpful, and for me, like it's come at such the right time. And one of the other interesting ways that I find this text, and it's that your book has um, just spurred some additional thinking, is not only how it's helping me in my own self-knowing, self-peace, and therefore pursuit of God, but what happens, what our hopes are for how we are in community.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we one of my favorite things that you say, and there are so many, but I pulled this one out when you say in the introduction, here's what I wish I had known at the top of this journey. A bad theology will kill you, but a good theology will not save you, because none of this is about the right belief.
Mm-hmm.
And, you do, of course, explain, and we've been talking about the point being this healing journey of coming back to yourself over and over again, peace within yourself, um, and that the journey toward wholeness never really ends.
Mm-hmm.
But then I found it related to some of this wisdom you give in chapter 3 about why unhealthy Christian spaces are so harmful and do contribute so many of those voices in our heads that we can't quiet, because they measure us against this rubric of perfection. And you
Yeah.
say they trick us into surrendering power and authority to them as if
Mm-hmm.
we can't know the truth for ourselves.
Mm.
So I started thinking about the way that, those of us who identify with some kind of evangelical movement or deconstruction,
Mm-hmm.
who have left more fundamentalist conservative Christian spaces, it's easy for us to think that once we find the right progressive community or set of beliefs,
Mhm.
that we find salvation.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that can be, a major step in the right direction, of course. Like I'll argue for the benefits and virtues and health of those values all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But even progressive, activist, more liberal spaces are at risk of some of these rubrics of perfection,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
that we can fall into the trap of believing that they will save us, and that we can still avoid this inner work
Mm-hmm.
because the community is aimed in the right direction and it saves itself in that way, and we're saved by it. So I just wonder, like, how do you reconcile this with the way that surrendering authority to a set of beliefs outside of us,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just the trickiness of that, staying true to ourselves, and like, how have you found your way, where have you encountered maybe
Mm-hmm.
spaces that still, even though they have merits that you want to stick with,
Mm-hmm.
you still have to find yourself in it before finding salvation, if you will, in this
Yeah.
community.
Yeah. I think a lot of communities, anybody who calls himself a community group of some kind, like runs the risk of like the institutional, like becoming institutional and becoming stagnant and stale. And you run
Yeah.
the risk of people with egos wanting to run the show either from a sense of, I really love this, I don't want it to fail. Excuse me.
Hmm.
Or, pardon me. Um, or you run the risk of, you know, groupthink behavior and like making
Hmm.
the institution or the project or the movement more important than the people. Um, and I see it both, you know, not just in like church spaces or like religious spaces, but like this is in like movement spaces too. Like in
Yeah.
even ones that are run like even queer organizations, even you know queer organizations
Hmm.
run by any sort of group. Like there's always can be somebody who just like is more in love with the power than they are the people.
Yeah.
Mm,
Um, and so I think when finding new community, what I look for more than anything is like I'm really looking for friendship. I'm really looking for people with whom like I have
Mm.
something in common with that I enjoy. And like that can be, how we, engage with religion and spirituality on a Sunday morning. But at least for me, I think I was when I, formally left, or just like I decided that I would be unchurched for a while. I started looking for where it was a little bit less pressure. It wasn't about being good. It was about knowing I am good.
mm,
Where, um, I didn't have to be on all the time. I didn't like there was like the expectation of it was not that I give 20 hours of my week and I tithe 10%. Um,
right.
it was my kindness and presence and just, hey, do you want to go play trivia with us? Hey, can you watch my dog
Mm.
while I'm out of town for a week? Um, and even that's not a requirement, but just like a lovely request. But I think like so many of us, if we go back to the original statement, a bad theology will kill you, but a good theology will not save you. Um, I think that's the bump many people run into is like we think, and I
Yeah.
thought about it too when I started seminary. Is like I'm going to go to seminary and I'm going to find out what I don't know so I can make sure I've got it all right. And it was in seminary that I realized that this right here, it's just like, oh, religion, spirituality, like it's always contextual. It's always come from people, and that's not necessarily a
Hmm.
bad thing, but we have to recognize that like because of that, you know there's not divine perfection requested. There's human perfection requested, which is um in divine perfection everything changes, everything moves, everything grows.
Mm,
But we are industrialists in many ways. We want to make something that's going to last, and nothing does. So I think what I really like,
yeah.
it's not about knowing the right thing or even being the right person, but just knowing that you're all right, and starting from that
Yeah.
point of like,
Mm,
silly as it sounds, nothing you do or don't do makes you any less beloved in the eyes of God, and I mean that very seriously. Um, there's a book that you might actually love, Ashley, Monk and Robot by it's
okay.
a two book novella series by Becky
Mm,
Chambers, and there's a robot in it who's like talking with this tea monk who's like a human. They're in a utopia. They're wondering, like, I don't know, like, why is it not enough? Why is it not enough? Why is it not enough? And this robot who has just spent its time wandering the wilderness, watching stalagmites grow sometimes over
right.
decades, just
Wow.
says, well, the reason I don't know how to tell you this, sibling, but it is enough for you to exist in the world and marvel at it. I know this
Mm,
because no matter
yes.
and to know that no matter what, I am wonderful.
Mm,
Simple as that. And it says, well, how do you prove
that
that?
does sound like a book I love.
How do you proof text that? You look at the
No,
trees.
you can't.
They will proof text it for you.
Right.
Look at your body
Yeah.
naked in the mirror, tell yourself you love you. Recognize the thousands of things happening at one time to let your body continue. The
Mm-hmm.
the things that have to go off without a hitch, heartbeat by heartbeat, so that your body continues. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where it's like when people say like you got to get rid of that external validation thing. That's really, I think, what it is like if you move from trying to be validated to being in wonder. Oh,
Yeah.
and that's why I think like I don't know. I feel like it makes it easier than trying to like say that I believe in God the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, of things seen and unseen, and light from light, God from God, etc. Like I don't know how to assent to all that all the time. Usually never.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's more simple. Maybe it can be. And then once you get the little
Mm,
things, then like the beautiful, poetry of that statement of I believe in God the Father. Like it can mean something
yes.
completely different when it's not being manipulated by people in power. Ugh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I
Yeah.
answered the
And
question on that one. I hope I did.
no, you
That's
did.
okay.
That was great.
We're with you.
And I those confessions are so abstract. And another thing that I love about the book, and which made my practical theologian's heart sing when I read, and I'm quoting you here, theology not embodied is just theory. And
Bingo.
the the three of us are all practical theologians, and so this is really important for all of us. But it's amazing how often, as spiritual leaders, we get stuck without our own life-giving spiritual practices.
Yeah.
And
Oh
I'd
my
love to
God,
hear you
yes.
talk to me and to the listeners, because I think we all struggle with this if we're honest, even seminary professors. Talk to us a bit about this concept that you return to throughout the book on cultivating a living practice. And how does theory begin to transform into embodiment?
Oh, ooh, my favorite thing in the world. This was also like one of my beefs in some way with like a seminary experience. I'm like, I get it. We're here. And like, and I'm not shitting on CTS. I love CTS was the greatest experience. Everyone should go there if you want a seminary experience. It's great. And
Yes.
comma, I always think like if I could go back and teach a seminary course for at first semester, everyone's required to do it. Spiritual practices for the pastor or for the parishioner or for just for some like spiritual practices for seminarians. And I would want to do an entire semester of I want you to learn how to breathe. I want you to learn what it feels like to be in your body.
Yes.
I want you to learn what it is to utilize something like a journal practically and not in a way where it's just like, well, today I did, but in a way that can actually be helpful for you. I would want like, because that's I think that's like it just in general, like from in Christianity in general, growing up, it was such an academic exercise. And for many of us, and I'll say like it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like in yoga, there's like a whole branch of the yoga of the mind where you contemplate basically the holy mysteries, and that's how so many people come into oneness is through these beautiful concepts that coalesce within here. And so like for seminary professors or pastors who are very like academic heavy, that is a form of devotion. That's a beautiful thing. And I think it's got to be one part. It's like you can't just the karma yogi would say that it's only through acts of service that you burn off your karma. The bhakti yogi would say that it's only through devotion and sweetness to the guru, to God, through which you find liberation. And I really do think like I would call myself a bhakti yogi. That's where I get in, but it's also like it can't be the only thing because every practice is going to fail you. Eventually, it's
At
like
some point.
you keep the practice for so long it gets stale, and you gotta. For me, like I got to figure out how to make sure it's lively. So I think shifting it with the seasons is brilliant. That's why I think having an altar space that you refresh, and I'll talk about specifically about that too. It's like Christians, some Christians hear altar space and they think pagan witchcraft. So we're gonna invite that, and then it's like no, like Jesus is over there next to Mary Magdalene, Saint Francis, and then the root of my yogic lineage, Bhagwan Nityananda, and then Ganesh. Like they're all here. But it's one of these things where it does not have to be a non-Christian space. You can make it explicitly, deeply embodied for you. I also have pictures of my dead family up there too. So it's a way for me to stay connected with my ancestors. And every single day I strive, and most days, the first thing I do, I put the dog out. I pour myself some iced coffee because I'm gay and we only drink iced coffee. That's a fact. And I come in and
So check that box. You've officially
I've outed myself on the air, everybody. I am
Oh my.
Oh no, they didn't know.
Iced coffee, oh no.
But I come and I sit down and I light a candle and I, maybe I'll pull a tarot card and maybe I'll grab Rumi and I'll read a poem. And then I'll move a little bit to do some just like a couple sun salutations, whatever, just to stretch the body. And then I'll sit and I'll just breathe. And like for me, if I don't know what I need to focus on, if I don't know what the mantra is for the moment, I go to, there is great love for you here. And I just focus on that over and over. There's great love for you here. There's great love for you here. And what's cool is Abraham Hicks points this out, is that like thoughts attract, the law of attraction says that which is like unto itself is drawn. And with thoughts, it's very, very clear in that, because if you start thinking, oh, I'm such a shitty person. Oh, I'm so bad. Oh, I didn't do my practice. I'm such a lazy practitioner. God, I wish I was better. Why can't I just sit down and do it? Why, before you know it, you are in the pits of hell.
Right.
And then the other thought, there's great love for you here. There's great love for my friends. There's great love for this earth. There is nothing, this is coming from A Course in Miracles. There's nothing my holiness cannot do. My holiness blesses the earth. Everything that is me is part of God's mind. And God's will for me is that I would be happy. All the things that I have learned over these past things just come and I dwell upon them. And that to me is one of those things where just like, I can't like throw like a verse at that. I just
Right.
have, and like the thing is like, I no longer need to proof anything. I have experience. And that I think is like the difference between, a dead practice and a living practice, is that the living practice is going to start showing you results. And it's from those results that you kind of like figure out, okay, what works for me? So for some folks, going on a walk every single day to be in nature and to be quiet without technology, that's their meditation. For some people, it's sitting
Essential.
down.
Yeah.
For some people, it's I have to go to the gym. I have to sweat. I have to move in this way. It's like everything can become an echo for the voice for God. Everything can become karma yoga if you're mindful about it. This is like when Brother Lawrence was talking about practicing the presence. This is what he was talking about. Everything becomes practice if you have the mind for it. But before that, if we don't have the mind for it, sometimes you got to make a formal thing of it. And I think what a lot of professional spiritual people do in the helping profession, pastors, theologians, professors of theology, is it's like, man, you know so much. And also like sometimes I want to sit down and was like, tell me about your relationship to the Christ. Tell me about tell me about the mystery that drew you here. Cause like that for me is so interesting and juicy. And also not everybody gets it. And so to have people who do and who are willing to go there with you to say, well, yeah, you are crazy, but that's okay. It's just like it's one of these things where sometimes like I feel like I'm crazy, and my teacher says, "Well, you are. You believe in something. You fully profess to think that the spirit of the living God, the Christ, the one who died 2,000 years ago, executed by the state. You think he's still with you? That's insane." And it's helpful. Whether or not I'm right, I couldn't say, but I know that the thought that Christ is with me, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That like, again, these are thoughts that are like unto themselves being drawn by a singular point. And when you hold, the more you practice that thought, the more you practice that, that becomes the basis of your reality. And I think too many of us, it's like everything. It's just like get caught up in your work, do your work and do it well. And then also, as much as possible, where are you connecting to wonder? Where are you connecting to love? Is your life the best word? Is it delicious and juicy? And like, are you really coming alive? Because if you're not doing something every day, like, like too many, like we know too many people who are professional pastors and are dry as a desert. And like, this is no shade to people in the profession who like are lacking the resources or time to care for themselves. But you really like, if you are to be a caretaker of souls, it is your, like, if I could yell something at all pastors everywhere and all people who are in the caring profession, if you believe that this is your calling, it is your duty. It is your responsibility. And I think those of us who, claim to take charge over souls, there's a higher karmic implication to that. If we are charged with the care of souls and we're not caring our own souls, or we're just phoning it in all the time. And I'm not saying that like, you don't have to be perfect. But if the majority of the time you're not coming from a place of connection, I'm wondering why you're still doing this. Because, oh my God, like your liberation, your health, is just as important as the health of your parishioners. And unfortunately, you can't walk them into health if you're not there.
Right.
And I'm not saying you got to be perfect.
This,
I'm saying you got to be willing.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I give another plug to the book at this point too, because for anybody that's wondering, yes, but where do I start? Like, I'm dry of even like tools and ideas of how to do this, because I also like found myself asking these questions not too long ago. And um the the book just opens up space to start believing that these things are possible, to start from soil, and start growing,
yes.
if that's where you are, or start to kind of enrich the garden of your soul, and that beyond even the chapters of the book and the meditations that you provide as a supplement, I mean, there's so much, but then at the end, these additional tools of kind of a rule of life, and that you offer those things in the book. And so really listening to you say this is so, I think it probably is speaking to folks who are listening and believe. I want to say, like, if you're wondering how then to get started, then this is additional
Yeah.
additional encouragement to get this book,
Yeah.
and start letting Kevin like help along this journey.
It's the best thing I've ever written.
And reach out to them for coaching too.
Yeah.
I love that you're
Yeah.
practicing this and guiding people who might need a little extra little support.
Yeah. And I'll say, like, I don't ask people to do anything I'm not willing to do myself. And so, like, I've really like been on a little bit of a hiatus up until the top of May. So this is brilliant timing. I think I just got for y'all know I was stranded on an island with a bunch of queer people this past weekend, and I couldn't get back in time for our first call. But as going to that space, I was reminded deeply, like, how important it is to, like, it's just been so clear. I'm like, I have been dry. I have not been caring for myself. I've like, and sometimes that's the thing too, is that like when your practices fail you, because eventually sometimes they do, this is the other part of it, which I think is going to be the next book. I touched on it in the very last chapter and a little bit, but this book is about personal practice. I really think that the other part of it is finding community. Ugh, annoying.
Yeah.
Because like I love doing things on my own. I love being self-sufficient, but I am not a guru. I am not a bodhisattva. I am not the Christ. I am just some girl, And the other side of it is really like, don't do it alone. Find somebody who's even mildly interested to do it with you, to just experiment, to be intentional about these things, because it's so much easier when you're doing it with a friend. And this weekend being among 120, like everybody's like, they're all California surfer babes, and it was just like everyone was very chill. But like for the first time in a while, I could just be a normal human and just be taken care of.
Be with your people.
Yeah. As much as you like, especially for the caretakers out here, and like we have to be willing to receive care. We can do all the self-care in the world, and still like we are creatures who need one another. I was like, and like, it's hard to find. It's worth it though. It's worth it to keep looking.
Yeah.
So, get your practice right and get your people right. Then you'll be in fine shape.
There you go.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you've offered this as a gift to all of us who are in ministry. This Preacher Creature podcast is really focused on helping to kind of equip and support preachers. But if we don't get this practices bit right, if we are always desiccated and burned out and just going from one committee meeting to another and one sermon to the next, we lack the capacity to be compelling in all of the areas of our life. So I'm so glad that you offered this. It's very much for me a situation where the student becomes the teacher, because I've learned so much from you, and this has been really, it's really just a joy to see how you're thriving and blooming in your spaces. And the church is gosh, we need more Kevins in our life.
Mhm.
So thank you
Mhm.
for this great work.
Thank you.
And preachers, go buy What Makes You Bloom.
Please
I
do.
promise you, it will change your ministry.
Oh,
And then start a cohort book study with it too.
yeah.
Yes.
And also, if you want me to come in
Absolutely.
and do a little thing with you, I am down for everything. That's
Yes.
those are incredibly kind words. I receive them. It makes me feel very good, and I'm glad that I have to keep telling myself, Kevin, the book's only been out 6 months. Why are you freaking out? That I'm like, I hope it's doing. And like,
We're just getting
I
started.
know, and I'm always like, anyways. And this
Mhm.
is part of the practice. Rest it, slow it down, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I echo that, just like the way that my heart has been so full in seeing not only this, but many of the fruits of what you're doing these days and all the work that you put in. And I think back to our first days in orientation and
Those
Old Testament, sitting together and going through our
the first day
little.
of Old Testament was the
Oh my
day that
gosh.
changed my life. I'm not even joking. It was the day that
Yes.
everything broke. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And that,
Yeah.
but
Even we weren't ready for
no,
that.
but it was so good, and
So
forever grateful.
so good. And so yeah, to be just seeing you shine and your work shine in this way gives me just so much delight, and thank you for
Thank
it
you.
as a friend and a peer.
Thank you for having me in this
Kevin,
space.
thank you for joining us. Thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to see where you head from here, because it's only going to be more beautiful and more juicy. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.